Welcome, everybody. My name is Bill Doyle. I'm a vice president with the Decision Management Group at FICO. And our main presenter today, Senthil Erlapan, who is the leader from the product group covering the onboarding, risk, and fraud and compliance components at WorldPay. The title of our presentation is The Cure for Digital Disruption. And just to put some context, selfishly from a FICO perspective, as mentioned, I'm with the Decision Management Group. Now, FICO, most of you know from our scores, but many of you are customers of ours as well in our areas of solutions in around fraud and risk. But those components are built on top of our core platform, the Decision Management Suite. And this is all about automating decision making. And it's bringing together the basic capabilities around analytics, optimization, and rules to enable you to build applications in a transactional nature to automate your decision making. And that's a key part of what Senthil's going to get into as we move into this story. So for us, it's about digital decisioning, but digital disruption can mean many things to many people. And as a segue to that, I want Senthil to define for the challenge you had with digital disruption.
Thanks, Bill. It's great to be here. So quick introduction about WorldPay. We are a large payment processing and payments technology company, processing payments in 146 countries, 126 currencies. We process around 40 billion transactions every year and around $1.7 trillion in payment transaction volume. And we process around 300 payment types. So we're here to talk about our journey on the customer onboarding space and how we use centralized decisioning to accomplish that. Customer onboarding is very key to any organization, right? So that's the customer onboarding is the first introduction to any customer to a company, right? So first impression is the best impression. So obviously you want to make sure that that initial onboarding experience is seamless, right? You can have the best products that you offer, but again, if your customer onboarding experience is not up to par, again, it really kind of gives that sour experience to the customer. It's almost like you go to a restaurant, it's got the greatest menu, the best food, but again, the service is not good. You're going to walk out an unhappy customer, right? So Bill talked about digital disruption, and digital disruption is happening everywhere. And payments and the customer onboarding space in payments is no exception, right? So there are a lot of these new fintechs, these new startups that are completely changing the landscape, right, and how you onboard a customer faster, efficient. But being a large payment processor, so there are challenges for us to kind of leapfrog and stay ahead of the disruption. Number one is we already have legacy processes and applications and platforms in place that we need to kind of break these silos and get to beating the disruption. And the second important mandate is managing the speed of onboarding with compliance, right? It's kind of a fine balance. As much as you want to accelerate the onboarding speed and make it a great experience to the customer, it's also very critical for us to make sure that we are following all the regulatory and compliance mandates, right? We don't want to cut any corners. So we really wanted to invest in a platform that can kind of do the both, right? Help us in a completely automated onboarding process, at the same time making sure our risk controls are in place. So before we got to a centralized decisioning system, so I'll quickly talk about the silos we had in place, right? So we had multiple lines of businesses, right? Each one of them being an entry point for providing merchants who do payment processing with us. So we had our core line of business, which is pretty much, in the most part, are card-present transactions, right? These are the regular brick-and-mortar retailers where you go to the store, you swipe your card, and then you process transactions. And then we had an ISO line of business, which is independent sales organizations that partnered with us to provide payment processing services. And then we had our e-commerce, our card not present space. And then we also had our integrated payments division. So we had all these different lines of businesses, right? And they were all operating in their own silos when it came to the underwriting process, right? So every one of these silos, they had their own boarding application, and then they all linked to their own underwriting application, right? And they also had specific processes within these silos, completely different from each other, right? So these silos did not talk to each other. The first line of business, the whole underwriting process, was not aware of what the other person was going to do, right? So there was really no interconnection between these different components, right? So there was really no way for us to offer a centralized risk strategy across the enterprise, right? And there was no centralized reporting. If I wanted to get a complete view of the entire underwriting process across the enterprise, I did not have that lens with this silo processes in place. And to add to that, we had challenges within each silo itself, right? So within each silo, there were a lot of manual processes in place. So when an underwriter had to look at an application and perform underwriting, it took several days, right? Because a lot of these functions that an underwriter had to do was all manual, right? There was a lot of swivel chairing, and an underwriter had to go to multiple systems to gather information, to look at information, to review information, and then gather all this information in one spot and manually take a decision. So obviously not the most efficient and productive way to do things, right? And plus there's always this percentage of human error that goes when you're trying to take a risk-based underwriting decision based on all these manual inputs and interactions. And to add to that, the challenge here is the speed of onboarding, right? So obviously all these processes take time, right? Multiple touch points, swivel chairing. So the overall experience to underwrite a merchant was leading up to several days, right? So obviously not the best experience to the customer. So we really wanted to get to a space where we could have a centralized decisioning platform that could pretty much get inputs from all these different silos into one spot, and then be in a position to make a centralized decision on any application that flows in, right? No matter where the application is coming from. So that was our strategy to get into a centralized decisioning platform.
And part of that also was that you had a lot of shared componentry, a lot of the same tasks being done in the different silos. Why couldn't I build once and use across all of them?
Yeah, again, reusability is also one of the important reasons why you want to get into a platform, right? So once you've kind of built this framework, it's very easy to replicate that when you have more players trying to feed into the platform. So once you get all your data into one single place, and then you have a decisioning management platform sitting on top of it, it makes life very easy to make n number of combinations of decisions based on the data that's flowing in, right? And that was a key decision for us to use a centralized decisioning system, and then we leveraged the FICO decision management platform to do that.
How was the challenge in convincing the siloed owners to move into a centralized platform?
So actually, if you really look at all the people who are part of those silos, right, they, in fact, were not able to concentrate on what they were supposed to work on, right? An underwriter, his core job is to do risk review, right? They wanted, so the effective use of their time is to go ahead after the high-risk merchants, right? And then go and review them and see if we have to really let them process with us or not. But instead of doing that, they were actually working on all these manual touch points and reviews and stuff that they really wanted to get out of their hands, right? So obviously, this was a boon to them because they could really do what they were supposed to do.
Right.
Right.
So the first part of the journey, you did this leveraging the FICO platform, but it was done premise-based.
Right.
And now the interesting benefit of the platform was that, hey, you could solve a lot of your merchant underwriting, but there were a lot of other potential use cases. And so now you had to make some decisions now about, do I build other stuff? Now I can use this platform to build other pieces and replicate for new applications, but do I also consider the cloud?
Right. So before I get to the cloud decision, right, so I'll briefly talk about the advantages that we got out of moving into a centralized decisioning system, right? So as part of our effort to break down the silos, so we built this centralized decisioning. We built this application called Merchant Underwriting on the FICO DMP platform, a centralized decision engine, and then we pretty much integrated all the different lines of businesses, right? So into this platform, right? They all we needed from these business units was to send us the required data for us to make an underwriting decision on that merchant. So we got all these components, all these data components in, and the biggest advantage we got out of that was you now had a place where you can do a centralized risk strategy, right? So you can either apply a common risk framework across the enterprise, or depending on the type of merchant or the line of business, right? You can tweak those parameters that are specific to that line of business. The second big advantage was we completely eliminated all the manual touch points, right? So the way we have the underwriting system working right now is an application comes in. Depending on the type of application, it calls the right third-party services to make the right checks, and then all the outputs from those checks are then fed into the decision management engine, the decision management platform, and then based on how that merchant is set up for decisioning, it makes an automated decision whether it's going to approve, refer, or reject the merchant, right? So completely hands-off, right? So this is the part I was talking about, the speed, right? So we really make an underwriting decision in a few minutes, right? All these manual touch points completely gone, and you can make a decision in just a few minutes, right? And the other big the benefit we got out of this was our auto approvals, right? So auto approvals are pretty much an application flowing into the underwriting system and a decision being taken on that application without any human touch points, right? Your deal flows in, the underwriter does not even know that the deal is coming in, and it's automatically approved. So we've increased our auto approval percentages by almost 60%, which is a pretty good number because of a centralized platform, leave alone accelerating onboarding time from days to minutes. So once we got into this centralized platform, right? So a byproduct of that was we started looking at other use cases, right? So we didn't want to just treat this platform as a merchant underwriting platform. We wanted to use it as a decisioning platform, and a byproduct of that is consumer underwriting. Right, so we have an initiative called Merchant Pay ACH, where we are partnering with large retailers to offer prepaid debit cards. So a part of that use case, there was a need to underwrite a end consumer who applies for that debit card, and we built this application called Consumer Underwriting on the platform, right? And then so there's a lot of use cases that had opened up, right? So the more the use cases open up, there's more need for us to ramp up our infrastructure, right? And then, and also we also wanted to leverage a lot of the analytics, the machine learning capability that comes with the platform. And the more you start using some of these advanced capabilities, there's an increased need to scale up infrastructure that's sitting behind, right? You can build any type of cool technology on the front, but again, the infrastructure is the basement that's right. Kind of holding the house, right? So we then started reviewing options we had on the table, right? So do I go back and scale up infrastructure, which is still a point in time, right? When I build up new infrastructure, I can only think about what I know at that point of time, right? I can build something for 3 years down the line. And for a company that's been growing as fast as WorldPay, right? We've been growing and we're still growing. It's kind of impossible to predict what's going to happen in 4 years from now, right? And payments is a very changing landscape as well. And that's when we had to really sit down and make a conscious decision to say, hey, am I going to continue the on-prem route, or do I go to a cloud-based service?
And preserve your investments.
Yep, absolutely.
That was a key part. So then you made the big switch, or
Right.
started the journey to the cloud. And you learned a lot along that way.
Yep. So again, talking about the decision to move to the cloud, right? So there were a lot of decisions that really made us to move to the cloud. The number one factor was the issues we were facing in supporting a third-party application in an on-prem infrastructure, right? So I'm pretty sure a lot of people in the room can relate to what I'm saying, right? When you have a third-party application sitting on on-prem infrastructure, you've kind of got three layers, right? You've got the underlying infrastructure, and then you've got the software, the underlying software that powers the application, and you actually got the third-party application. And in an on-prem setup, the third-party application is owned by the vendor, right? In this case, for us, it was FICO. And then the underlying software, the operating system, the database, and the infrastructure was owned by us, right? So these three components need to kind of blend with each other, right? The moment I break one of these three components, the application is going to crash, right? And which is what is a problem we faced in an on-prem infrastructure all the time, right? So we would do a security patch, we would do a software upgrade, it would break the actual DMP application, right? And then we had to get FICO on the call, who do not have access to our production systems. It was long screen sharing sessions with the FICO vendor, our infrastructure teams, our support teams, our DBAs. Obviously not the most pleasant experience. And more than the pleasant experience for the folks who are on the bridge call, you have a customer who does not have access to that service, right? So that was one big reason we wanted to shift it to kind of a managed services model and moving to FICO's AWS cloud instance, right? It kind of shifts a lot of the pain we've faced in managing the infrastructure and the underlying software, and completely shifted to the cloud provider and the vendor. And the second reason is scale, right? As I talked about, we've done a lot of integrations to the merchant underwriting platform, right? So we took one silo after the other and started feeding it into the decisioning platform. And then now we're building new use cases and building applications on the top of the platform. So every time you try to add all these components, right? It's more transactions, more volume. Obviously, there's a very increased need for us to scale up our infrastructure. And the other thing is, whenever a vendor comes up with a complete re-architecture, right? So I know we are now moving into DMP's DMP's version, which is based on Docker and Kubernetes. In order for us to move from the current platform we have to this latest and greatest version of Docker and Kubernetes, it required for us to really go purchase a whole bunch of servers, right? A whole bunch of servers, a lot of investment, and the pain and suffering of having to go to talk to infrastructure teams, plan this out, get this procured. Obviously, a lot of investment and also a lot of time to market, right? And then as we scale, you have to do this process multiple times, right? So scalability is a big reason we wanted to move to the cloud, because the cloud automatically comes up with inbuilt ways to scale up on demand. That was one big reason. High availability, right? So obviously, as we start throwing more customers and applications, use cases on the platform, high availability is very critical. And AWS has got inbuilt high availability through they have HA over multiple availability zones, right? That comes kind of inbuilt, which was something that we really wanted. And the last thing is the speed to market, right? So since we were spending a lot of time in just managing the infrastructure and all the underlying software, security patches, upgrades, we really were kind of diverting the focus of our engineers from spending day in and day out on all these platform issues instead of actually spending time on solutioning, right? So where we want to spend our time is to look at business problems, look at new use cases, and start building solutions, right? That's where we really want our engineers to spend the time, and unfortunately, we're not able to do that in our on-prem infrastructure. So moving to the cloud is really helping us to have the developers and the engineers concentrate on what they like to do and what they're supposed to do, which is building great solutions for customers.
Another dimension of that you had mentioned was also the fact that between FICO and AWS, doing with multiple customers, you're benefiting from their experiences and inheriting that, not having to learn that alone.
Yep, absolutely, right? So again, FICO and AWS, there's a lot of lessons learned that we learned from both FICO and AWS, and those are the things that we can leverage, right? Instead of learning it the painful way, it's easy to learn from somebody else's mistake.
Let them blaze a trail, innovate,
right,
and then pull it in by virtue of your investment in the cloud.
Right, absolutely.
So with that, though, this journey took some time, and you had a lot of lessons learned. I think folks here undertaking this same journey. What were the tips you wanted to share back with these folks? Right.
So we are in the middle of our journey, right? We're not completely done yet, but we've started. We're progressing pretty well. I think the first thing that we did, and I believe is critical for a lot of the folks in the room who are starting or in the middle of this journey, is getting the engagement and awareness from all your stakeholders, right? So when we started this whole journey, we made sure that we talked to every single stakeholder who would be affected by this cloud migration, right? We wanted to make sure that, number one, everybody is aware, right? There are still folks in organizations who are not either aware of the cloud or they've got their own fears about going to the cloud, right? So that's having that awareness and engagement is very critical, so that they're all fully baked into these conversations. And when you engage different stakeholders, there's a lot of inputs you get from them that really helps you in an effective migration strategy, right? The second thing is coming up with an effective migration strategy, right? And again, the engagement piece is very critical for you to come up with a good migration strategy. It could be your testing strategy, your user acceptance testing, your cutover plans. So we really spend a lot of time to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's when it comes to making sure that we have a solid proof migration plan that takes into consideration pretty much anything that could go wrong with the cloud migration. And another aspect that we really want to make sure was that the performance, right? Obviously, when you're talking about trying to underwrite merchants in a few minutes, speed becomes a big factor, right? So we've put solid performance testing strategies to make sure that there's no compromise on the performance aspect, right?
That was mandate number one. No compromise on speed, I think you used the phrase.
No compromise on speed. And one more thing that we did before the migration was the business application that we are migrating to the cloud, which is the DMP platform in this case. Before we made the journey to the cloud. We completely abstracted that core business applications on the platform. Any interactions into the platform, right? Anything feeding in, feeding out, touch points from our in-house applications or touch points with third-party services, we completely extracted that with an API layer, right? So once you've got your core business application extracted on the front and back through an API layer, you can literally take the application and shift it to the cloud, and all you have to do is repoint some of these touch points back to the cloud instance, right? And that, I believe, was something that we're really finding out to be easy when it comes to the migration, right? So it's almost like a plug and play, where you've already taken the core business application, you've shifted it to the cloud, and all you have to do is repoint all those touch points, internal and external, to the cloud version, right? So these are a few things that we have done, and which I hope will benefit the folks who are trying to make that journey to the cloud.
We got about just under 5 minutes left. We want to open the floor up for questions for folks for Sentinel or anyone.
It sounds like you must have also very big compliance issues, being a global enterprise. What's that like? The integrated teams also on regulations and compliance on a global basis?
Right. So the challenge with the compliance, right? One is to make sure that we're strictly following the compliance guidelines, and the second is making sure that we are constantly adapting to the ever-changing regulatory compliance mandates, right? For example, we had this mandate this last year for the beneficial ownership, right? So we had to make sure that we capture the beneficial ownership information for all the merchants, right? So every time there's a regulation change or a compliance mandate, so obviously that requires a lot of changes in the boarding application as well as underwriting application, right? So moving to a decisioning platform that can scale up really helps you to pretty much make the change on the fly, right? If you have rules, you can just make a business rule change coupled with some other changes on the boarding application, and it makes it pretty quick and easy to implement.
What kind of application tools are you using, just generally speaking? Anything? Any particular application building tool or?
So the application tools we use, there's a component called FAST, which is kind of inbuilt within the FICO platform. It's called FICO Application Studio. And then we are also migrating to the new version of FICO that uses a tool called DMN, Decision Modeler, right, which is pretty much used to orchestrate your decisioning.
Nice.
Right.
The rules engine, yeah.
How many of your applications have you containerized or moving towards microservices-based architecture?
So we still have not done anything when it comes to microservices, but the platform we're migrating to, the latest version of the DMP platform we're moving to is a Docker Kubernetes container-based platform. But we have not still gone the microservice route yet.
Thank you.
Time for probably one more. Anyone?
What's you mentioned touch points to third-party services. How are you getting to the external data for?
Right. So we consume around, I don't recall the exact number, but I think we consume almost 8 to 9 third-party services, mainly for KYC, tax ID checks, credit checks, DDA verification. Most of these third-party providers, we have API calls that you make out to these providers, and then we get the results back from these providers that gets fed to the decision engine for decisioning.
So all the data converges with the decision modeler and is synthesized there, and then the rules are.
The rules will
fire
be
on
in the
that.
decision modeler, right? So all the results from these third-party services, they all get fed into the decision model, the decision engine,
And
right?
follow-up question: What type of people will be maintaining the rules? Are they IT people or are they business people?
So the rules are maintained by the end business user, right? So IT does not IT does not understand risk, and you don't want IT to manage risk as well, right? So
That's risky.
yeah. So that's pretty risky. So all the risk. All the rules, the risk rules, and the management of the rules are administered by the risk and compliance team.
So that must increase your agility to respond to market conditions,
Yep,
changes.
absolutely. Yep. So some of these changes that don't require any programming modifications, it's as seamless as a risk and compliance resource goes in, makes a rule change, and we're done.
With that, we've come to the end of our slot. Senthil, thank you very much.
Sure.
Oh,
Yep.
One
Go
more
ahead.
question. So, Senthil, I'm curious if you could comment on tooling around data management for entitlements, lineage, cataloging, anything like that you could share?
I'm sorry. Can you please ask?
Tooling, like what sort of tooling that you had part of the foundation here?
So you're talking about reporting, or
Yeah, like for data management, right? For like data lineage, data entitlements, data cataloging, things of that nature.
so we've leveraged a lot of the stuff that's available within the DMP platform itself, right? We do not have any specific third-party tools that we use for the process. So we pretty much manage everything that's already available in that platform that kind of helps us to manage the data that gets fed in,
Okay.
right?
I'm getting threats from the back of the room. Thank you very much, folks. Senthil,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.